Welcome to WandrinDutch, the home of the Midweek Mix-Up podcast. Today, the gaming media eventually released their first impressions on the Xbox Series X. So we're going to have a look across the industry to see what their first impressions are, the benefits they've noticed, any drawbacks, and any niggling points that they may have. Let's have a look. Firstly, one of the points that the vast majority of the gaming media has pointed out is the extremely quick loading times compared to the Xbox One X. I'll put on screen some of the examples of comparisons that the media have noticed just on first glance. Again, these are unoptimized, these are at system level and automatically enhanced simply by playing the games on the console from either the SSD or even via USB, just using the architecture built in to the Xbox Series X. The load times are drastic in some circumstances, cutting minutes off of load times from Xbox One X, which was the previous generation's most powerful console. Not only on Xbox, but obviously against PlayStation. Now that doesn't always translate into the best looking games. Of course, there's a vast majority across the board know that a lot of the better looking games across the industry came on the lower end platforms. That again wasn't down to resolution, that was simply down to artistic style and detail put into the worlds provided by those developers. One of the key points to take away from the industry is, alongside the load times of course, was also some of the basic enhancement to backwards compatible title. So along with the increased load times, we also had steadier and more increased frame rates across the board. Again, these aren't optimized, these aren't enhanced intentionally by anybody other than automatically at system level. When we talk about system level, what that means is there is no hands-on approach from any developer or any member of the Xbox development team or architects or engineers to get these games running better. When those games run, they automatically run better due to the increased performance of both the SSD, the CPU and the GPU, along with the Xbox Velocity architecture built into the console. What we have noticed, and what a lot of them have pointed out so far, is the Auto HDR, which is now implemented at system level, including on old 360 games such as Grand Theft Auto 4. To activate the Auto HDR, you go down to the system settings, apply Auto HDR, and go through some basic setup procedures like you would when you set up HDR in-game, where it shows two images and you tune your TV between the two. This will then ensure that that is put across the board, across all games, even those which did not have HDR built in at development stage. These go all the way back to Xbox OG and Xbox 360 titles, as well as Xbox One titles that did not have HDR built in. Of course, some earlier games that did not have HDR built in, such as Rise, etc., will now have that at system level without any implementation or hands-on procedure from the developers. Aside from the Auto HDR, the increased load times, you also had the steadier frame rates, which I mentioned. So we saw games such as Final Fantasy 15, which saw steadier frame rates without developers implementing any patches on the basic modes, i.e. Final Fantasy 15 Lite, as it were, so the original 1080p version, went from on Xbox One X having an average of 32 frames per second and dropping below that in some circumstances in heavier dense scenery such as cityscapes, to having a solid fixed 60 frames across the board. Now, of course, it would be interesting to see when this is uncapped and you get the graphical options and graphical modes on Series X unlocked for such titles, to see just how much the GPU can handle, whether or not that 60 frames can be maintained. I assume, though, based on these results, which were present on Digital Foundry's reports on the Eurogamer article, which will be linked below, that this will probably easily handle 60 frames at resolution mode on Final Fantasy 15 and many other titles. Now, of course, another one of the many features that the industry loved was the quick resume demo. So of course they only had a number of titles they could test this on in their preview state. Of course the console isn't launched yet, so there's a lot yet to be added up until launch, when we have hundreds and thousands of games to play and patched ready for quick resume, etc. However, in their initial testing, obviously had a handful of games that they could test. Games like Halo 5, State of Decay 2, Hellblade, Ori, Gears 5, and many other single-player games. I have to reiterate that, single-player games. You could switch between on quick resume within 5 seconds. When quick resuming, you would be put into a save state, as it were. So it would pause the game, save there, you would pause, switch between again. So you could just bring up your guide menu, click open to the other one, it would then quick resume onto the next. Within 5 seconds the game would pick up from where you left off. Quick resume does not work with live network games, so Destiny 2 for instance, Sea of Thieves for instance, Division 2 for instance, in certain circumstances. Mainly because they are live service games. By that, of course, they have an active server which is always live and ever evolving. So if anything were to happen, of course, you would die multiple times. There is no official pause in those games. Your character is always there no matter what is happening around you in the world. So of course that would not work correctly. Of course it could work, but I'm sure people would have a lot of complaints when they come back and their character's been murdered 30 times. Overall, the impressions have been really positive around the industry. Primarily, as mentioned, with the load times. An article on The Verge by Tom Warren mentioned that he had switched between the Xbox One X during his testing on the Series X and compared it to going back to from essentially fibre optic internet to dial-up modem connectivity. That was the stark contrast in usability and speed of not just loading games, but the quickness of the UI, how the games felt, how the menus felt, how the overall usability felt for the games itself. These are initial impressions, of course, and impressions will continue to arrive over the coming weeks when developers, the media, and everybody else starts to pick up on more and more of the systems in side-by-side comparisons. We also look forward to seeing the differences from both Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S, and then of course eventually PlayStation 5. PlayStation 5, of course, have not mentioned features such as quick resume, so we can only wait and see how that pans out and whether or not that has been implemented. We do know that one of the articles that have been picked up whilst this has been translated is that the quick resume, i.e. the save states, as well as the operating system, removes 190 gigabit of usable space from the 1 terabit SSD, leaving 802 usable gigabit of SSD storage for games. Now, of course, that is relatively normal. However, due to the save states and other OS requirements, it is larger than it would be in previous years. These are great initial impressions, and links to all articles for all of the industry first impressions will be below the video. I hope you enjoyed this video, and again, tune in Thursday this week to see the next episode of the Midweek Mix-Up podcast with ourselves and Iron Lords. Remember to like, subscribe and click the bell button to be notified when we go live and upload new videos.